Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our program will begin in just a moment. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Our program will begin in just a moment.
You might get me a diet root beer. I think there's one down. I don't know if there's any up here, Joe.
Good day. Welcome to Advocacy Anywhere, powered by AJC. Advocacy Anywhere is AJC's new digital platform that will enable you to engage with AJC's global expertise, content, and advocacy from wherever you are. Today's program is brought to you in partnership with Jewish Insider. You can sign up for Jewish Insider's daily kickoff by visiting www.jewishinsider.com. On the eve of Passover and Easter, we are honored to be joined today by Cardinal Timothy Dolan, Catholic Archbishop of New York. Cardinal Dolan will be in conversation with AJC's Director of Interreligious and Intergroup Relations, Rabbi Noam Marans, and will offer reflections about the difficult times in which we live. After we hear from Cardinal Dolan, we will take your questions. You may email your questions to questions, that's questions plural, at ajc.org, or you can use the Q&A feature in Zoom. Cardinal Dolan, Rabbi Marans, you have the floor.
Thank you, Allie. And thank you, Cardinal Dolan, for being with us during Holy Week as we confront a very unusual, crisis-driven Passover and Easter. Thank you for being with us.
It's my honor, Rabbi Marans. I always relish any opportunity to be with you, a man I consider a good friend, and I especially cherish times when I'm able to partner with AJC, a remarkably effective organization that I admire very much and with whom I've been able to participate in many projects in the past. So thanks for inviting me.
I think this is a moment where we need to step back for a second and talk about that relationship so that it can help our listening audience know more about where we're coming from. We say in the Psalms, which you love, Hine matovu manayim shevet achim gam yachad, how good and pleasant it is for brothers and sisters to dwell together in unity. That wasn't always the case during Holy Week between Christians and Jews. And here we are as if it's no big deal. A cardinal and a rabbi are getting together to speak. That wasn't always the case. We have an amazing history, you and I, you and the Jewish people, you and AJC. We've been all over the world together, from Oberammergau to the Vatican, to welcoming Pope Francis in Washington, to the opportunity to be present when you were elevated to Cardinal, when you received from AJC the Isaiah Award for Interreligious Leadership. We cannot take this for granted. Let's just begin there with a moment of celebration in history about what it means for a cardinal and a rabbi to be in this kind of conversation during Holy Week on the eve of Passover.
Splendid point, Rabbi Marans. This is a time, this trauma that we're going through with the virus, that we're learning not to take things for granted. We miss things that got rather routine. You and I are almost the second generation of recipients of a remarkably providential friendship between Jews, Christians, particularly Catholics throughout the world, which has blossomed, if I might say, without danger of presumption, in the United States, and even more precise, that seems to have flourished here in New York City. We can't take that for granted. You're right on target. I would have been surprised if I did not have occasions with the arrival of Passover and the Easter celebrations to get together with Jewish friends. I was at one last night with our mutual friend, Rabbi Peter Rubenstein, and I've been looking forward to this gathering. These have become part of my religious holy day celebrations. You and I'm afraid, heck, we just figure this is par for the course. It was not always that way. I'm an historian by training. I know that not all that long ago, Holy Week was a time that the Jewish citizens of cities in Europe would literally flee, because as the Christian majority would celebrate or would observe the passion and death of Jesus, there would be that obnoxious reductionism that the ones responsible for that were the Jews. And so very often Christians in a abuse of religious fervor would take out wrath upon the Jewish population. You and I were privileged, I think it was 2010, was it not, Noam? When you and I went to Oberammergau together to see the renowned Passion play that takes place in that Bavarian village every decade. By the way, it's been canceled this year because of the plague. I think 2022, which will give us a lot of time to plan our next visit, Noam. Anyway, you know what I'm getting at. That Passion play, as deeply moving as it was and rich in Catholic fervor and devotion, was also tragically the occasion of anti-Semitic caricatures. And thanks be to God, the friendship that you and I are now basking in has been able to purify the play from that. And you and I were the beneficiaries in 2010 when we met with the authors, the director, and the producer before and after the actual production to even offer further counsel on ways they might continue the progress. It was, you and I did not miss the point that in 1933, by the way, I don't want to contradict what I said, the Oberammergau Passion Play takes every 10 years, except in 33 and 83, which is thought of as the particular anniversary of the Passion, which we believe took place in 33 AD. So in 33 AD, who was the loudest cheerer at the Oberammergau Passion Play, but a man who had just been elected chancellor, Adolf Hitler. So that's part of the ominous, what you might call relic of what should be the high point of unity, friendship, and charity among all peoples, particularly Jewish and Christian. That wasn't always the case. You and I have been privileged to have participated in quite a few celebrations of Nostra Aetate, which was the blessed decree of the Second Vatican Council, a council being the highest form of church teaching, that dated from December 1965. You and I were able to participate in 50th anniversaries of that inspired document, which bluntly condemned anti-Semitism and which said something that seems to be so simple and straightforward, but which tragically needs to be repeated over and over again, that the Jews are not responsible for deicide, meaning killing the Savior, killing Christ. Yeah, we rejoice in that, Noam. You and I are honored to have been a part of the legacy of that Jewish-Christian friendship, but we've also talked about the fact that familiarity breeds contempt. And we are worried that maybe generations coming after us are not as well versed in what it used to be like and might begin to take it for granted, meaning that the kind of the pizzazz that you and I see in Jewish Catholic friendship might begin to dull. We do not want to let that happen. That's why, for instance, I would insist that courses on Jewish Catholic dialogue be an essential part of training for our seminarians, those young men who are preparing to be priests, because the upcoming generation has to be aware of the horrors of the past, the progress that we've made, and must be sensitive to the fact that that progress can never, ever be taken for granted. So I think occasions like this do that, right?
I think so as well. And I would be remiss if I did not mention the special role that AJC had running up to the Second Vatican Council and Nostra Aetate under the leadership of my legendary predecessor, Rabbi Mark Tannenbaum, who brought in Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel into the process and met with Cardinal Bea and others. And it's in that context that this love and familiarity that we have for one another that is representative of our peoples, that we can genuinely speak about this incredible challenge that we have before us today.
Mhm.
I know that everyone would like to hear what it means for a Roman Catholic leader, for a cardinal, who is in the middle of Holy Week, is on the eve of Good Friday and Easter, and his flock and many others are arguably at the pinnacle of pain and threat from a health crisis that we have not experienced in our lifetime. This confluence of events demands a religious response. And what can you say as the Cardinal of New York about that?
Noam, it's very interested. And like yourself, as a pastor, as a religious leader, I've been doing a lot of thinking and listening to my people and my brother priests and pastors who are out there. On the one hand, pardon me for now going into the on the one hand and the other hand, but on the one hand, this seems like a very, very difficult week to be observing the Passover, Good Friday, and Easter. For one, we can't get inside our synagogues and our churches. This is a heavy burden. You and I belong to religious traditions that cherish coming together. You and I belong to religious traditions that insist almost joyfully that families, friends, and neighbors assemble for the holy days. You and I belong to a tradition that knows that an essential part of that is to gather at our synagogue, at our parish church, for ritual, for prayer, for song, us for the sacraments that have characterized the essence of our faith for millennia. We're unable to do that this year. We just had something as simple, Rabbi Marans' last Sunday, Palm Sunday, opening Holy Week, the opening pitch, that our people were unable to get their blessed palm. This is so simple. These are just pieces of olive branches that we bless on Palm Sunday, that the people waved in acclamation and welcome to Jesus as he entered into the holy city of Jerusalem for the Passover. We bless them and distribute them. Our people couldn't get them this year, and that hurts them. It's so simple, but they miss that tangible sign of connection with their religious family. So on the one hand, Noam, this is a very burdensome time, okay? On the other hand, I'm wondering if the invitation is very, very implicit in what we're going through, that the trauma that our city, our state, our nation, our planet is going through, the trauma of this virus that every day has new setbacks and new causes for apprehension, does, as a matter of fact, provide a backdrop to the mystery and message of the Passover and Easter. Both of them, by the way, have similar messages, folks. You know that, right? If I understand correctly, the Passover celebrates the fact that God rescued his chosen people from despair, slavery, darkness in Egypt, as they passed over, not easy, as they passed over to a new life of promise and hope in the Holy Land, in the Promised Land. Similarly, for us Christians, we pass over. We go from the terror of Good Friday afternoon, when literally, Rabbi Marans, we read in our gospel that the sun hid itself in eclipse, in sorrow, that the earth tremored with sadness, that the suffering and death of Jesus literally shook the earth. We go from that, passing over again by God, to the glory, the radiance, the new life of the resurrection of Jesus, all right? I'm wondering, Noam and listeners, if that message is so needed today, as all of us are asking, what's all this about? What's God trying to teach us? Are we going to get through this? What is my faith Does my faith illuminate this in any way? As you and I delve into the mystery and message of Passover, Good Friday, Easter, we get our answer. And I'm just wondering if our people are going to pick up on that. Then, Noam, we can't forget the other thing. We've got the backdrop of what? We've got the backdrop of nature. I understand tonight we're going to have what's called a Passover Moon. Okay, we have the backdrop of nature when March is going to April, when winter is going to spring. Winter, not much light, no warmth. Nature is dead. The branches are bare. The grass is gone. The wind is chilly. We are passing over to spring with new life, with warmer breezes, with more sun every day, with the growth and lavish beauty of nature. Is that not Passover? Nature? Is that not Good Friday to Easter Sunday? We've got a great teacher. We've got a great choreographer in the Lord that you and I both worship. And I think he may be using the trauma of the virus, the connection with Passover and Easter, and the beauty of winter to spring, that Passover, to drive home the message. It's been at the heart of his revelation for a long time.
It's interesting that you mention the nature and the weather. I don't know if you know this, but Passover has 4 names. And one of the names is Chag HaAviv, the holiday of springtime.
Aha.
In fact, Exodus chapter 12 announces that that month is the beginning of the new year, the month of the Paschal sacrifice and the liberation. Today, it's the 6th month in the Jewish calendar, but the holiday of Passover used to be the beginning of the calendar, and it began with the spring. Now we do it in the fall, but Passover is known as the holiday of spring.
Beautiful. Similarly for us, Rabbi Marans. So, Easter is the old English word. We don't have it. In other languages, the word for Easter is much closer to Passover. Like in Italy, it's Pasqua, which would be very close to the Pasch, the Passover. Here in English, we use the old English word Easter, which the word scholars tell us it was the word used to describe the leaping of the newly born lambs in spring. When you would see them, brand new little babies, the lambs kind of leaping, they would use the word Easter for that. So once again, you've got the new life. You've got the cycle of nature where the lambs are being born at this time, which, by the way, I presume is why lamb is a traditional Easter meal for us. So, yeah.
So let's get even more serious about this.
I want to let you know that this is diet root beer and not Guinness Stout. You may be seeing this dark liquid here, and you know me well enough to know I would not pass up a Guinness Stout, but I gave it up for Lent, so I got to wait for Easter. This is diet root beer.
So no coronavirus exceptions for Lent?
No.
Okay, so let me make this a little bit more difficult for us, because it's not just a proverbial question, it's a real question. We are in a city, in a region that now has unprecedented death around it. People are fighting for their lives. Frontline heroes, and we know who they are, hospitals, those who make sure that we have everything that we need, the paramedics, all that are providing the food for us. They are in harm's way in order to make sure that we can be safe, together with the police officers and the fire department. And in all of this misery, there is a proverbial theological question which people ask, and that is, where is God?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And you've alluded to it a little bit, but I'm wondering if there's a particular Catholic answer to that question, and then I promise to give you a Jewish answer.
That I will look forward to. Rabbi, thank you. That is a probing question. Let me offer a couple of responses, attempt something. Where is God in all of this? You gave me the hint to the first answer that is very obvious. We see God's presence, and this is kind of the easy answer. We see God's presence in the heroic sacrifices for good and love and compassion of those who are tending to the sick. And you mentioned them, the sacrifices they're making. These are men and women who are working 14 hours a day, literally putting their own lives at risk, and then worried not only that they're not caring for their own families, but worried, am I bringing this hidden enemy back into my home? This is an example of sacrifice where it is easy for us to see God's goodness and God's care, all right, in these brave people. You mentioned some of them. You know who I like to point out, Noam, and it dawned on me 2 weeks ago when I went out for an early morning walk. The city's empty. It's a great time to walk. And who do I see there? The streets are empty. Who do I see but the sanitation workers? Now that's a nice word for what you and I used to call the garbage men, the people who pick up our garbage. And I stopped and I watched in admiration. I said, these are about the most meat and potato, ordinary New Yorkers that you can get. And they are here picking up our trash at the cost of expense. We're throwing out some toxic stuff these days, all right? Where do all the used face masks, where do all the used thermometers go? These men and women are picking that up to cleanse our city. And I thought to myself, yeah, I can see it in the doctors and nurses. Yeah, I can see it in the rescue workers in the New York Fire Department. I also see it in the New York Sanitation Department. By the way, I'm going to do a video. They've asked me to do a video for them to thank them tomorrow, which I look forward to. So there's one answer, Noam, that I think is very obvious. Where is God, you ask? God is in the dedication and the selfless sacrifice of these men and women that we see all around us. It's a little harder to see, to answer that question, in the midst of the suffering, all right? That's very difficult for us. You and I are blessed to come from a tradition that tells us that God is in the midst of adversity. God is always there, especially when we think he's not. We succumb to the temptation to think that when everything is fine, when there's smiles galore, everything is open, everybody's getting along, oh, God is there. Although, by the way, we're tempted to ignore him in those moments. We also equally believe that in the time of setback and adversity and trauma and suffering, God is there, all right? That takes an act of faith. He is there. Sometimes we don't notice that except in the rear view mirror. It's interesting, if I read the Jewish scholars on the Passover and the Exodus, if I'm reading them properly, most of the magnificent Passover and Exodus stories that you're going to be reading and pondering beginning tomorrow, those are written long after the events occurred. They're people recalling God's presence at times they were tempted to wonder where he was. You graciously asked, Rabbi Marans, is there a uniquely Catholic answer to where is God in this adversity? And there is, because on Good Friday, we're going to contemplate the cross of Christ. And for us as Catholics, when we look at the cross, we know God is there. Jesus Christ is the Son of God. He's divine. He is there. At the moment of utter degradation, God is with us. We have a beautiful moment when we contemplate what we call the Passion, which is the reading from the Gospel of the terror that Jesus went through in his suffering and death. And after the Roman soldier ripped open his side on the cross with a spear, and blood and water came out, he stepped back and he said, this is the Roman soldier, truly this man was the Son of God. He made an act of faith because he had watched Jesus at these terribly, terribly tortured moments. He had watched the humility. He had watched the forgiveness. He had watched the mercy. He had watched the quiet suffering. He had watched what seemed to be the indomitable trust in his heavenly Father. And that led him to say, truly, this man is the Son of God. So it's easy to see him in all the good sacrifices that are going on. It's easy to see him in the healing. I'm talking to people that have gotten through this. And you know, they're of course very aware of God's goodness. I'm unable to talk to people who are going through it now. If I were, they might say, where is God in all of this? But he's there as well. And as these people that have made it get through, they kind of begin to reflect. And the gratitude is a reflective virtue. They begin to reflect and they say, ah, he was there. He got me through. Remember the nurse with the soothing cold towel. Remember the doctor that grasped my hand and said, you're on the way back. You're going to get better. They saw those as divine messengers. And we got to do that too, Noam.
I promised to briefly share with you my response.
Thank you. I'm eager for it.
Which I will do. A few weeks ago, I wrote a piece to help support our hashtag Be a Mensch campaign, in which AJC is recording all the good works, a mensch being a good person, that one can find, and we get submissions and we herald them. That's consistent with what you were speaking about. And I share that with you because it's at the core of my theology and there's an overlap with yours. I grew up in rabbinical school reading Rabbi Harold Kushner's When Bad Things Happen to Good People.
Know it well, I admire it.
And some people who are philosopher kings didn't think it was the best philosophical tract ever written, but it had good common sense. And that common sense for pastors went like this. There are things in the world that we cannot control. There are things in the world that we can control. Terrible things are going to happen. We're never going to be able to fully explain why that is. And we can't just put it on God's shoulders, proverbially. But our role as human beings is how we respond to that, how we rise to the occasion, how it makes us better, how when we reach out to our fellow human being, we are doing God's work. And I also embrace your theology that we are not alone. My favorite psalm, it won't surprise you, is the 23rd Psalm. And if I can, I'll recite it, the one verse, the key one in Hebrew and in English. And if my Jewish friends will allow me, I'll use my preferred King James Version. Gam ki elech begates almavet lo irara ki ata imadi. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for thou art with me. We believe that God is there with the sufferer and that we are doing God's work, the tools that he gave us, that God gave us in order to cure that person. That's my theology.
Bravo, Noam. You remind me of a story, and you've probably heard it, of Psalm 23, the Lord is my shepherd, that this was back in the 1950s, and a socialite here in New York City had a dinner party to which was invited Richard Burton and Archbishop Fulton Sheen. You might remember the legendary preacher, Fulton Sheen. And at the end of the party, the hostess said, we've got two of the best speakers, two of the best actors in a way in America with us, and Mr. Burton and Archbishop Sheen. I would like to ask each of them if they would read Psalm 23. And Richard Burton read Psalm 23, and it was magnificent. And Fulton Sheen read Psalm 23, and it was stunning as well. And the hostess said to both men, "Bravo, you read it well. Mr. Burton, it's very clear to me that you know the Psalm. Archbishop Sheen, it's very clear to me that you know the shepherd." Now, you and I not only know the Psalm, we also know the shepherd, as do our people listening, because that Psalm is so key to our image of the divine, that the Lord is my shepherd. Isn't it interesting, Noam? Most of us in New York have never seen a shepherd. We don't see sheep. When I go to Ireland, which I do all the time, I see sheep and shepherds all over the place. And, I'm saying to the driver, oh, can we get out and can we pet the sheep? They're so cuddly. The Irish will always say, "You Yanks, when you see the sheep, you think they're so cuddly and you want to pet them. When we see the sheep, we think of sweaters and mint jelly." But you and I, we know the shepherd, don't we? And we know the sheep. We are the sheep, and that makes that psalm so powerful.
Fantastic. I'm going to ask you one more question before we take some questions from our listening audience. They've submitted them via the internet, via email, and Ali is going to help us with that. But I want to ask you one final question, and then we'll talk some more as well, but we'll hear from others before we do that. During a difficult time like this one, is there an image, a text, a personality, a hero that gets you through, that could be something for us?
You will not be surprised, Rabbi Marans, that I would answer yes. My hero, my image would be Jesus. And the text that I think of is the same one to which Pope Francis referred 2 weeks ago. I don't know if you were able to see. He did something in Catholic imagination that was exceptional. We usually have something called the Ubi et Orbi twice a year, when the successor of St. Peter, the Bishop of Rome, the Pope, would come to the central balcony of St. Peter's and give a message and give his blessing to the city and the world, the Ubi et Orbi. Those two occasions would be Christmas at noon and Easter at noon. Pope Francis did one 2 weeks ago. He said, "I'm going to do an extraordinary Ubi et Orbi." Now, it was extraordinary because it wasn't supposed to happen then. It was extraordinary, too, because as the eyes of the world zoomed in on him, he was the only one standing in St. Peter's Square that is usually teeming with 250,000 people when he gives his Ubi et Orbi. And he read the passage in the gospel where the apostles were in a boat on the Sea of Galilee, with which you're so familiar. And they were in the middle of a turbulent storm, very turbulent. And the boat was taking on water. And it seemed rather imminent that it was going to sink. The apostles, his best friends, who were fishermen, so they'd be used to this, even they were intimidated and scared out of their wits. And Jesus was in the boat, and Jesus was asleep. Jesus was sleeping. Pope Francis says the Lord was sleeping. And they finally woke him up. They were so scared. And they said, "Lord, aren't you afraid? We're going to sink." And he stood up and calmed the winds and calmed the seas. And he turned to them and said, "Oh, you of little faith, why were you afraid?" And Pope Francis went on and he said, "We are tempted to think that the Lord is asleep. We are thinking that he's asleep at the switch, that things are out of his hands, that things are going the wrong way." And then he said, and I love it, you and I, Jews and Christians, cling to that virtue of hope, hope, hope. And Passover and Easter are days of hope. He said, hope is that virtue that gets us through when we're tempted to think the Lord is asleep. And I cling to that today, Noam. Do you have one?
Well, in addition to the Psalm 23 that I mentioned, I'm going to identify one that is getting me through this Passover. And you'll like it because it's in Aramaic.
Okay. The language that Jesus spoke, yeah.
The language that Jesus spoke, because he was a bit of a rabbi himself.
That he was.
And every year we say it, and this year for American Jews and others, it is the most profound in our lifetimes. And that is, we say in the ancient Aramaic, Hashata Avdei Lishana Haba'a B'nei Chorin. This year, we are slaves. Next year, we will be free.
Mm.
And I often turn to the people at my Seder. They're American Jews primarily at my Seder, although we have people of other faiths in a normal year. And I say to them, do you know any American Jews who are literally slaves? I don't think so. We're living in the most wonderful diaspora Jewish community in history, in a city where a rabbi and a cardinal can speak with one another like this, and nobody thinks it's a big deal. It is a big deal. And this year, that is really resonant.
I love that.
We are enslaved to this pandemic, but if we do what we are supposed to do, next year we will be free.
I love it. I love it. I'm gonna learn it in Latin. Way to go, Noam.
It's Aramaic to me. Allie, we're ready for you, my dear.
Thank you so much, Noam, and thank you, Cardinal. I just want to remind everyone that if you'd like to ask a question, you can use the Q&A feature in Zoom, or you can email your questions to questions@ajc.org. Cardinal, our first question is from a board member in Chicago, and they're just curious if you could talk about the church's medical and social services at this time. How are Catholic charities and Catholic hospitals responding?
Boy, you bet I am. I'm itching to talk about them. Thank you, because what's happening to our the kind person who submitted the inquiry, what's happening is that people only seize on the fact that the churches, small c, church buildings, the synagogues are closed. That doesn't mean that the church, capital C, or the Jewish faith, capital F, they're not closed. They're more radiant than ever. One of the ways we see them very radiant now in our within our Catholic family would be in our works of charity and healthcare. Here in New York, as Rabbi Marans and many of you know, because we cooperate so very much with Jewish organizations and works of charity and healthcare. One of the ways we do that is through Catholic Charities of the Archdiocese of New York. And they are on the front lines. I snuck in, it had to be 2 weeks ago, I guess, Noam. It was an early Sunday morning. The city was empty. And I was going to have 10 a.m. Mass at St. Patrick's, but early that morning, I went up to the shrine of Mother Frances Xavier Cabrini. She's become a household word. She's the patroness of immigrants. And we had that controversy here, remember, about whether she should be one of the more noteworthy women in New York history. And anyway, St. Frances Xavier Cabrini is the first American citizen to be made a saint, a wonderfully warm, gracious Italian woman who took care of people in need. Anyway, I went to her shrine where she's buried, and I said a prayer. And then so that was kind of an act of faith and prayer. Then I said to Father Stephen, I said, let's drive over to the Bronx to Abraham House. And there in a corner of the Bronx, you had Catholic Charities. They had their masks on, they had their gloves on, huge tables set up on almost a block long in front of Abraham House that were filled with bags of groceries and with carry-out meals. And the Catholic Charities workers stood back to protect the safe distance. And some of them acted as ushers to bring the people one by one slowly to take what they need. Very simple, very elementary, but it showed me the work of Catholic Charities that goes on every day: feeding, housing, clothing, prisoners, refugees, immigrants. This is the work of Catholic Charities going on now more than ever, and thanks be to God, more effective than ever, because we cooperate with the interreligious community, the Jewish community, other non-Catholic Christians, the Orthodox, the Eastern religions. The second would be our healthcare. We have what we call here in the Archdiocese of New York something called ArchCare. And ArchCare would be our umbrella organization that quarterbacks all of our healthcare outreach. So our nursing homes, some hospitals. We don't have many left. We used to have a lot of them in the Archdiocese of New York. Things are so complicated and they're so expensive now that we only have 5 left, but they're very good ones. And also some PACE programs where our elders go during the day for medical attention, for company, for some healthcare. All ArchCare does all that, visiting nurses, and ArchCare is doing a phenomenal job. They're on the front lines, especially in our nursing homes, and now they're welcoming more people in. As the neighborhoods say, they'll come and say, they'll knock on the door, say at St. Patrick's home up in the Bronx. They'll say, "Sister, my father he's got a fever. He's suffering from the virus, but we called the doctor and they can't take him yet." And they'd say, "Well, just keep an eye on him. And if the fever goes up, let us know. I'm scared." So they say, "Come on in. Let us give him a bed. Let us give him some food. Let us keep taking his temperature." Those are the acts of healthcare that are going on. And I appreciate you asking, because I'm very grateful for them. You and I, the Christians and Jews, come from a tradition that believes that faith without love is hollow, that charity without faith can become empty as well, and that the true believer would combine them both. And Jews and Christians, that's part of the moral imperative of the faith that we cherish.
Thank you, Cardinal. Hallie?
Oh, sure. Thank you so much, Cardinal. Our next question comes from David Inlander, our former chair of Interreligious Affairs in Chicago. And David wants to know, the coronavirus does not distinguish in its horrible rage between Catholics, Jews, or other religious followers. Does this experience serve to reinforce your magnificent work in combating bigotry and caring for and respecting people of all faiths?
Yes. Allie, why are we getting all these people from Chicago asking questions? This is just not. Don't you have anybody from St. Louis, my hometown?
Cardinal Dolan, I'm reminding you that David Inlander was my chair.
I gratefully remember David.
And we spent time together in Washington during Nostra Aetate at 50, among other occasions.
I remember David gratefully, David. It's good to connect again. You're on to something, David. Not only suffering and affliction do not have prejudice. They attack everybody. So they remind us, what they're reminding us is that we're all vulnerable, that we're all fragile. I just turned 70 a couple of months ago, and all of a sudden I opened the paper one day to find out that I'm considered to be in the compromised health bracket now because of my age. So I got to be extra special careful. We're all vulnerable. We're all fragile. Also, David, remember that the caregivers are of every imaginable. Do you know what did you read Peggy Noonan, Noam in the Wall Street Journal a week or so ago? And she said, I wonder what the people who have been anti-immigrant and anti-refugee feel if they're sick in a hospital and see that most of their nurses and attendants are Filipino, Indian, and Latino. In other words, our caregivers, many of them, are of immigrant background. So not only does the fact that the virus does not discriminate, but that the caregivers include all, wouldn't it be great? I remember, Rabbi, when I was in the seminary taking the course on the virtue of hope. And our professor, who by the way lives in Chicago now, Father Joe Henchy, he said, in every crisis, in every affliction, in every adversity, God is whispering an invitation. And I'm wondering, David and Lander, if the invitation is to a lessening of the prejudice, the discrimination, the bigotry that all of us have been worried about, and that the AJC has done such a sterling job of combating. I mentioned to you earlier that last night I was on with Rabbi Peter Rubenstein with the 92nd Street Y. And Noam, he and I had arranged that about 2 months ago, and we were going to speak on, the theme was going to be the hate and the bigotry that we shudder to see rising again in the world. And both of us said, well, even though we're changing the topic, they are related, because perhaps, God willing, as Jews and Christians often say, God willing, prefacing a hope and a prayer that we have, this may decrease that sense, that lack of civility that we see. And even David, I'm wondering, even when you see some of it today, like some of these irrationally nauseating taunts against the Asians, even some of these obnoxious taunts against some of the small Jewish communities, that blaming them for the spread, the overwhelming defense of these people, and the overwhelming reaction from Americans to say that sentiment is hideous and nauseating, and we're not having any of it. Maybe this is going to be one of the goods that God brings from this evil.
Thank you, Cardinal Dolan, for being a person we can always rely upon to call it out, no matter where it comes from, right, left, Christian, Jewish, race, ethnicity. We're all created in the divine image of God, and a virus like this, if you didn't get it yet, you get it now.
I got it. You got it. Thank you.
Not you, I mean us. Allie, we have time for another question?
We have time for one more, and then I'll turn it back to you, Noam and Cardinal. But the last question comes from a board member in Washington, and the board member wants to know, as we get further and further away from Nostra Aetate, you mentioned earlier that we may slip back into a place of bigotry between our peoples. How can we avoid that?
Mm-hmm. One of the things that the Jewish community can be very proud of is in its powerful nudge to the human community to remember, not to forget. This, of course, applies to the trauma of the Shoah, but it also reminds us of, in general, the extraordinarily potent place that history, that memory has in the human psyche and in the human project. I'm an historian by training, and we love to repeat that phrase of George Santayana: those who are not familiar with the past are bound to repeat its mistakes. Or as we tease ourselves, those who hear that quote are bound to repeat it because it's such a powerful quote. But we're on to something here. We cannot forget. Now, I worry, and this is a good example with Nostra Aetate, which the board member has mentioned. We forget a lot today. I worry in our schools. I know, like you, Rabbi, like so many of you out there, I have the honor often of going to graduations of universities. They might ask me to be a commencement speaker. I might just attend because it might be a Catholic university. And as I watch where the degrees are being given, and I'm thrilled, most of them are what you might call technical or functional degrees, and they're great. Hallelujah. Oh, I'm not supposed to say that in Lent, but praise the Lord. Because their degrees in like healthcare, rehab. Thank God we got them, especially in the trial we're going through now. But every once in a while I'm saying, I don't see many of them getting their degrees in history, or literature, or theology, our philosophy. We can't discard those because those are the disciplines that keep memory alive. You and I are people of memory. We remember things that really happened. Beginning tomorrow night, you're going to remember what happened at the Passover. Beginning Thursday night with our Last Supper celebration through Good Friday and Easter, we will remember what happened on that hill and at that empty tomb in Jerusalem in the year 33. We are people of memory. We pass these on to our children. And one of the things we need to pass on is not just the good of our neighbor next door is Jewish. We have immense respect for them. I want you to learn about their faith. I want you to welcome them into your house. I want you to get to know their rituals and traditions, but also the bad. Because kids, it wasn't always this way. And let me remind you of what happened, what it used to be like. We got to be people of memory, and we can't succumb to the amnesia that seems to be rather dominant now. Do you agree, Noam?
You beautifully brought us full circle. I'm reminding you that about 50 minutes ago, we started speaking about how we cannot allow the normalcy that you and I feel in this kind of conversation to be taken for granted. And we're ending with the same kind of admonition that we need to teach a new generation how we went through the desert of Catholic-Jewish relations, and perhaps we're in the promised land of Catholic-Jewish relations, but we're not going to be able to hold on to it passively.
Well, you and I are the old timers now, Rabbi Marans, and we got to pass that on to the kids. And I'm glad I got you and the AJC to help me do that.
I appreciate that. And now I'm going to give you an opportunity for a 3-minute homily to bring us to closure. And then I'll have a 1-minute homily.
You're on. Well, I'll give a Catholic homily, okay? Folks, there's going to be 2 collections today. No, I'm just teasing, obviously, but that's our usual spiel from the pulpit. Anyway, let me just say, folks, this is a year, and I hope it's been obvious in the conversation between Rabbi Marans and myself, which I found unsurprisingly remarkably illuminating and enlightening. Let's recover the depth of our faith in the sacred events that we're celebrating, Passover and Easter. This just isn't cultural baggage. This just isn't a nice idea. This just isn't, oh, it's time for the Passover again. These are normative. These are definitive. These teach us about ourselves. This is God speaking to us in his loving actions. Actions speak louder than words, right? God spoke in Revelation, but boy, for you and me as Jews and Christians, we believe his actions speak louder than words, and he acted in the Passover. He acted in the Paschal mystery of the suffering, death, and resurrection of Jesus. This just isn't some kind of mental gymnastic. This just isn't some psychological psychobabble or something. This really happened, and it provides us with identity. It provides us with focus. It provides us with meaning. And if you don't think we need that today, you haven't been watching TV, listening to the radio, or looking at the papers, or looking out your window, because now more than ever, we need that meaning. Let's make hay while the sun shines and use the holy days this year for what they're intended for. Did I go over 3 minutes, Noam?
You were perfect. Thank you, Cardinal Dolan. And I'll try to stick to my 1 minute. I don't know if you know the song Dayenu. It's perhaps the most famous song of the Passover Seder. Everyone knows it. If they go to a Seder even once, it's raucous, it's loud, and it's a story about all the things that God gave the Israelites in order to liberate them from oppression and bring them to the promised land and collect the Torah along the way. And we say, if God had taken us out of Egypt, it would have been enough. If God had just given us the Torah, it would have been enough. But you know, if you look closely at that song, it wouldn't have been enough. If he took us out of Egypt, but he didn't split the Red Sea, it wouldn't have been enough. But what it is about, it's about gratitude. It's about knowing when you need to be grateful for the enough that you have. And in this crisis, we're all under a cloud of darkness. And we feel like the liberation will never be enough. But it's not going to be wholesale. It's going to be piecemeal. It's not going to reach every individual, but it's going to reach us as a collective humanity. And each of that will have been enough. And speaking of Dayenu, it will have been enough. It would have been enough if we were just in relationship, you and me, Cardinal Dolan. But we have much more than that. We have our ability to bring comfort and succor and wisdom and faith to our people together. That is a great gift that we have, and we are grateful to you for that. And let me be among the first to wish you a blessed Easter, and to all of our Jewish attendees, a happy, sweet Passover. And for all of humanity, good health is what we need right now. Thank you.
My gratitude to you, Noam, and my love and best wishes to all our listeners. A blessed Passover and Easter.
Allie, it's yours.
Thank you, Cardinal Dolan, for being with us today. We hope that you and your community have a blessed Easter. I also want to thank our AJC community for joining us, as well as our partners at Jewish Insider. Please stay safe and healthy, everyone, and have a happy Passover.
Thanks, Joe. Thank you, Noam.